My name is Eric Langley. I'm a man of patience, a man of precision. I've never been one for impulsive decisions, for emotional outbursts. I thrive on control, on understanding the full scope of a situation before I act. If life is a game, then I'm a strategist, always a few moves ahead. I've learned to read people well, to see beyond their smiles and gestures. It's this clarity that has served me, has kept me afloat in a world that moves too fast, where others too often act without thinking. But that was before Vanessa. Vanessa and I had been married for nearly 7 years. When I first met her, she was a whirlwind, a woman who was both beautiful and intelligent, with an energy that felt like the promise of something greater. She had this way of looking at the world with ambition, a kind of fire that set everything she touched ablaze. I admired that about her. She knew what she wanted and she went after it. We were the kind of couple that people envied. Successful, driven, well-dressed, always showing up at the right events, attending the right parties. We were the golden couple, or so I thought. In the beginning, she and I were aligned in ways I didn't even realize. We both wanted success, both wanted more from life than just survival. And when we bought the house, our dream home, it felt like the culmination of everything we had worked for. The large, modern place on the hill was supposed to be our sanctuary, a symbol of everything we had built together. It had high ceilings, wide windows that looked out over the city, and a backyard that felt like a private oasis. I couldn't imagine anything that could tarnish it, anything that could break what we had. But over time, things started to shift. Subtle changes at first. The late nights, the long hours at work. She began spending more time away, and at first I told myself it was just the demands of her job. After all, she was climbing the corporate ladder in finance. Her career was important to her. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. Something was slipping, and I wasn't sure what. I caught her in small lies. Nothing major, just tiny moments where she'd tell me she'd be home at 7, and I'd hear from her hours later, always with a reason, always with an excuse. I convinced myself that it was nothing, that I was simply overthinking, as I always did. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I just wasn't ready to admit it. Not yet. And then, one evening, the truth came crashing down. I had been working late myself. It wasn't uncommon for me to spend hours at the office, fixing bugs in the latest code or refining project details. When I pulled into our driveway around 9 p.m., the house was dark. Not unusual. Vanessa often stayed late at her office. But when I entered the living room, I heard voices, muffled, but distinct. One of them was hers. The other voice was unfamiliar, a low murmur that I couldn't quite place. I froze, unsure of what I was hearing. Was it just a business call? Maybe someone from her office? But then I heard her laughter. It wasn't the light, airy laugh she gave when we were alone. It was too deep, too intimate. My stomach twisted, but I couldn't move. I stayed there in the hallway, my heart pounding against my ribcage. Her words cut through the silence, sharper than any blade. You tell him to move forward with the sale. If he doesn't, I'll have no choice but to file for divorce and take everything. He'll get nothing. The room spun. It felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me, like everything I had believed in had crumbled in an instant. This wasn't just a business transaction she was talking about. This was something personal. And what struck me with the greatest force wasn't the coldness of her words. It was the sheer betrayal in her voice. She had been planning behind my back, orchestrating the sale of our home, the very place we had built together. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that she thought I would never find out. I stood there, rooted to the spot, as she continued. The conversation was a blur, but the words, those words, rang in my ears. Divorce. Everything. Couldn't breathe. And then there it was, the final blow. You know the deal will go through. He trusts me. He doesn't even suspect anything. He's too busy with his work to notice what I'm doing. She was speaking about me like I was an afterthought, like I was just some piece of furniture in the background of her life. A man who worked too much. A man who wouldn't notice the manipulations unfolding around him. I had always prided myself on being perceptive, on being able to see beyond the surface of people and situations. But here I was, blindsided. She had taken advantage of me. My trust, my loyalty, my blindness to the cracks in our relationship. And now the truth was clear. Vanessa had been plotting behind my back, weaving a web of lies and deceit for her own gain. I didn't move immediately. I didn't rush in, shouting, demanding explanations. No, I simply stood there, absorbing the weight of it all. I heard the door to the office open, and Vanessa stepped into the hallway, her face lighting up with surprise when she saw me. Eric. Her voice was too calm, too controlled. She wasn't startled, not at all. She had expected this moment in some way. She had probably rehearsed it in her mind 100 times. I could feel the anger rising, but I kept it in check. I couldn't let her see how much she had shaken me. I couldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. Instead, I smiled, a smile that was more for me than for her. "I know, Vanessa," I said, my voice steady. "I know what you've been doing." Her eyes widened just a fraction, and for the first time, I saw a hint of fear flicker behind her facade, but only for a moment. She quickly masked it with a calmness I hadn't seen in her before. "We need to talk," she said softly, and that was when I realized this wasn't just a betrayal. This was a war. It's funny how quickly your mind can shift from confusion and anger to clarity. The day Vanessa's betrayal hit me, I had been ready to tear down everything we had built. I imagined confronting her, throwing every hurtful word at her, demanding an explanation, and watching her crumble under the weight of her lies. It would have been easy, too easy, actually. It would have been the kind of reaction she expected from me, the kind of person she thought I was. But as I sat there, stewing in the bitter taste of her manipulation, I realized something important. This wasn't just about getting even. This was about regaining control. I'd been a fool, sure. I had trusted her implicitly, thinking that our marriage was built on something solid. But now I saw things differently. This wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a mistake on her part. She had miscalculated. And now it was time for me to correct that mistake. I sat in my office, staring at the file folder in front of me, the documents related to the house sale, the one she was trying to pull behind my back. It seemed like such a small detail, such an insignificant thing in the grand scheme of things. But when I opened that folder, my mind raced with possibilities. I wasn't going to play her game. I was going to make her play mine. The house wasn't just an asset for her to use as a pawn. It was my leverage, my first real move. But I wasn't about to act out of impulse. The old Eric Langley, the man she had known for years, would have charged in, fists clenched, shouting until his voice broke. But that man was gone now. That man no longer existed. I had a plan. The first thing I needed to do was gain control of the situation. I couldn't let Vanessa know how badly I'd been affected. Couldn't let her see how vulnerable I felt. No, I had to stay calm, collected, just as I always had. The world she had built was made of lies, and I was going to slowly deconstruct it until nothing remained. I started with the house. I called the lawyer's office that was handling the sale of our property. I didn't give them any details, just a brief and urgent message that something was wrong with the transaction. I told them I was in the process of reviewing the documents and had noticed discrepancies that needed to be addressed. I kept my voice calm, controlled, even when my insides were churning with rage. I wanted to watch her squirm. I wanted to make her sweat before she even realized the game had changed. It was a simple phone call, one that would begin to unravel everything. I had known about the sale from the moment I overheard her conversation. But I also knew she'd been careful. She had tried to cover her tracks, to make sure everything went smoothly, believing I wouldn't notice. She'd underestimated how well I knew her. I could already hear the panic in her voice when the lawyer told her the sale was delayed due to legal complications. It was a small victory, but it felt like the first solid step in my plan. Next came the research. I wasn't going to take anything for granted. I dug into her finances, into everything I could find. The accounts, the investments, the real estate holdings, everything. I knew that Vanessa had been spending money like it grew on trees. Her taste for luxury had always been a driving force in her life, but I had never questioned it. Now, I realized that I had been blind to how much of her wealth was built on lies. I contacted some of her business partners, old colleagues, and friends, people who had worked with her before we met. I didn't want to appear too eager, too suspicious. So, I reached out casually under the guise of checking in, trying to be friendly. I didn't need to know everything right away, just enough to begin piecing together her world. The more I learned, the more I understood how much of her success had been driven by deceit. Vanessa had always been manipulative, but I had no idea just how far she would go. The more I uncovered, the more I realized I hadn't been the only one she deceived. Her manipulations weren't limited to just me. I found evidence of a pattern: investors who had been misled, colleagues who had been left in the dust, clients who had been used as stepping stones. She had built her empire on the backs of others, and I was simply another casualty in her rise to power. The realization didn't sting as much as I expected. In fact, it almost gave me a sense of calm. Vanessa was a master of playing people, but I would outsmart her. I would expose the real Vanessa, and in doing so, I would regain everything she had taken from me. But none of this was enough. It wasn't enough just to gather information. I needed something more. I needed to hit her where it would hurt most. And that's when I remembered her secret. A secret that had always been her greatest fear. Vanessa had built an identity, a reputation that she fought to protect. She was the successful, charming woman who could do no wrong. But beneath that facade, there was a woman terrified of losing everything. I started to manipulate her environment, setting up small scenarios to plant doubt. It wasn't anything overt, just tiny moments that could shift the way she saw herself and the people around her. I made sure that her colleagues began to question her judgment, that her clients started to doubt her reliability. I didn't need to destroy her in one fell swoop. I just needed to chip away at the foundation until it crumbled. I knew the cracks would start to show, and once they did, there would be no going back. As the days passed, I kept a careful distance from her. I watched her from the periphery, a quiet observer of her unraveling world. It wasn't enough to destroy her. I wanted her to watch it all come undone. I wanted her to feel the weight of her choices, to understand the full scope of the betrayal she had committed against me. I wasn't going to be the victim this time. I was going to be the one who controlled the narrative. The preparations were almost complete. Vanessa was already on edge, and I hadn't even begun the real work yet. I could see it in her eyes when she looked at me. The suspicion, the uncertainty. She didn't know what I was planning, but she could feel the shift. And that, I realized, was the beginning of her downfall. She had been the one in control all this time, but that was about to change. The calm before the storm is a curious thing. I'd spent weeks carefully constructing the pieces of my plan, orchestrating the perfect web of manipulation and deceit. Vanessa had no idea how close I was to breaking her world apart. She thought she had the upper hand, that her sale of the house would be the final blow to my sense of control. She was wrong. What she had underestimated was my patience, my ability to stay in the shadows, to wait until the moment was right. And now that moment had arrived. The first blow was subtle but sharp, like the cut of a surgeon's scalpel. I had contacted her lawyer again, subtly pushing them to challenge the legitimacy of the house sale. I made sure to frame it as a technicality, one that would drag out the transaction and complicate everything further. I knew she would be livid when she found out, and that was exactly what I wanted. She needed to feel the pressure, to start questioning every move she made. When she called me that afternoon, her voice was strained, barely holding it together. "Eric, what the hell did you do?" she demanded, her breath quick and uneven. "The house sale's been delayed. The lawyer says there are issues with the deed and some discrepancies in the documents. What did you do?" I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence hang in the air, enjoying the discomfort in her voice. When I finally spoke, my tone was almost soothing, controlled. "I didn't do anything, Vanessa. I just wanted to make sure everything was in order. For our sake. But if you're in a hurry to sell, I'd recommend calling your lawyer to sort it out." I could hear the frustration in her silence. She was trying to maintain control, trying to keep it together. But I knew her well enough to understand that her mind was already racing, trying to figure out how much damage I had done, how long it would take to fix it. The power shift had begun, and she was starting to feel it. Her next move was predictable. She tried to play the victim, to paint me as the bad guy who was standing in the way of our financial future. But by now I knew her too well. I wasn't going to fall for her manipulation again. Instead, I continued to play my part, remaining calm, distant, and completely unbothered by her attempts to regain control. But this wasn't just about the house. No, I had much bigger plans in motion, and they were already beginning to unfold. I had reached out to her closest business associates, the ones who had always admired her drive, her ambition, her power. I didn't need to say much. I didn't need to throw accusations or outright lies at her. All it took were a few whispered words, a few suggestions that she wasn't as trustworthy as she appeared, that her business decisions had been motivated by something other than good judgment. I knew that in a world built on reputation and alliances, even the slightest hint of doubt would send ripples through her connections. One by one, I watched as the cracks in her business relationships began to widen. The phone calls she once received at all hours of the day and night started to dwindle. The invitations to exclusive meetings, the praise from her peers, all of it began to fade into the background. She wasn't as untouchable as she had believed. I hadn't lifted a finger to destroy her business empire, but I didn't have to. She had built it on shaky ground, and all it took was a nudge for it to start collapsing under its own weight. But the real beauty of my plan, the true satisfaction of it all, came from her personal life. I knew the one thing that Vanessa had always feared above all else was the destruction of her public image. Her reputation was everything to her. Without it, she was nothing. And so, I set the stage for the most significant blow yet. I had been gathering pieces of information, little snippets of her personal dealings, her secrets, her past. And now it was time to put everything into motion. I had one key piece of ammunition, an old investment project she had been involved in, one that had collapsed spectacularly several years ago, a failure she had swept under the rug and buried deep. I knew that if this information got out, it would shatter her. So I planted the seed. I made sure a few of her former colleagues from that failed venture were reminded of their involvement in the mess she had tried to hide. I sent a couple of anonymous messages to key influencers in her circle, subtly pushing them to revisit that past mistake. It wasn't about exposing her outright. It was about creating whispers, about letting the rumors grow until they became undeniable truths in the eyes of the people she cared about most. The first email I received was from one of her closest allies, a man who had always stood by her side, praising her success and ambition. But now his tone had shifted. The message was short and cold. I don't know what you're trying to pull, but I'm hearing things about past investments, things that don't sit right. You need to be careful, Vanessa. That was all it took. The seed had been planted, and now I could only watch as it took root and grew. I could already imagine her reaction, her attempt to salvage what she could, her scramble to repair the damage to her reputation. But by the time she realized what was happening, it would be too late. Her carefully curated world would have crumbled from the inside out, and she wouldn't know where to start picking up the pieces. And yet, even as I watched her world slowly unravel, something strange began to stir within me. I thought I would feel triumphant, victorious. I had been so consumed with the idea of revenge, so focused on making her pay, that I hadn't really considered what this would cost me. Watching her panic, seeing her try to hold onto the last threads of her empire, it didn't give me the satisfaction I thought it would. There was no elation, no sense of triumph, just a strange emptiness, like I had orchestrated something that was slowly consuming both of us. Still, I pushed that feeling aside. I couldn't afford to dwell on it. The plan was working. She was falling apart, piece by piece, and I couldn't stop now. She had taken everything from me. She had tried to sell our home behind my back, tried to control everything about my life. This was my moment, my chance to take back control. And I would see it through to the end, no matter the cost. As I sat in the quiet of my office, watching her fall further and further into chaos, a thought crossed my mind. Was this really justice? Was this what I had been waiting for all along? Or was I just becoming the thing I had despised? Another person consumed by bitterness and rage, another player in a game that never truly ends? The answer didn't matter. What mattered was that I had made my move. The game had begun. And Vanessa had no idea just how far I would go to win. It's strange how you can get exactly what you think you want, only to realize it's not what you expected. It's like standing on the edge of a cliff and feeling that rush of adrenaline as you leap into the unknown, only to plummet into the emptiness that follows. That was what I felt after everything had started to fall apart for Vanessa. I watched her world crumble from the shadows, the intricate web of lies and manipulation unraveling piece by piece. And yet, there was no sense of satisfaction in it. I had spent weeks setting things in motion, playing the game with patience and precision, each move deliberate and calculated. But when the house sale was finally canceled, when her business connections began to disintegrate, and when whispers about her past failures began to circulate, I didn't feel like a victor. I felt detached, empty. The first call I received after it all began to unravel was from her. I had expected it, her voice cracking with desperation, the facade of control slipping as her carefully curated image shattered. But when I picked up the phone, there was something different in her voice, something that, for the first time in years, didn't sound like the woman I had married. Eric. Her voice was small, almost hesitant. The power dynamic had shifted. Now she was the one who was afraid. What the hell is going on? Why are people talking about that failed project? Why is my lawyer telling me the sale's delayed indefinitely? I could hear the panic in her breath, the frustration. Her voice wavered, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of the vulnerability beneath the cold, calculating exterior. It was like the mask had slipped, and for the first time, she wasn't the woman who had always been in control. She was exposed, and that, in a strange way, was all I wanted. Not to destroy her, no, I had no interest in her complete downfall, but to make her feel what I had felt, powerless, helpless, out of control. I don't know, Vanessa, I replied, my voice as calm as it had been from the beginning. Maybe you should talk to your lawyer. He's the one with all the details. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I had already won. She was grasping at straws, trying to salvage what she could, but she couldn't fix the damage. Not when the seed of doubt had been planted. Not when her world was slowly imploding around her. And yet, as I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled over me. I had expected to feel a rush of victory, a surge of power as I watched her scramble to contain the mess I had set in motion. But instead I felt hollow. Was this really what I had wanted? Had I truly thought that watching her unravel would make me feel better? I had taken everything she cared about, her business, her reputation, her sense of control. But in the aftermath, I felt nothing but emptiness. I spent the next few days watching as the pieces of her life continued to collapse. Her colleagues, the ones who had once praised her, began to turn away. Business deals she had been confident would close fell through. Even the people who had once respected her started to question her decisions. I had made her appear unreliable, untrustworthy. But it wasn't enough to bring me peace. Vanessa, on the other hand, was spiraling. I could see it in the texts she sent, the frantic calls, the way she tried so desperately to maintain an illusion of control. She reached out to me multiple times, asking for explanations, demanding answers, but I gave her nothing. She didn't deserve the satisfaction of knowing that I had orchestrated it all, that she was a pawn in a game I had been playing for weeks. The silence between us was deafening, and the longer it went on, the more I realized how much I had let myself become consumed by this. For the first time, I began to doubt myself. I didn't call her. I didn't reach out to comfort her. She didn't deserve my sympathy, not after everything she had done. I told myself that, but the guilt gnawed at me. I had spent so much time and energy getting to this point, convinced that revenge would heal the wounds she had caused. But now that I had achieved my goal, I felt nothing. The consequences were more immediate than I had anticipated. Her business relationships were deteriorating faster than I expected. She had always been known as the confident, driven woman with a sharp business mind, but now her decisions were being questioned. She began to look desperate, clawing at the remnants of her career like a drowning woman. The worst part, though, was watching her personal life crumble. I hadn't intended for things to go this far. I had wanted to teach her a lesson, to make her realize what she had done to me, how she had played me like a fool. But now, as I watched her reach the point of breakdown, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed a line. I had wanted justice, but what was happening to her felt like more than that. It felt like vengeance, and in the quiet moments when I wasn't thinking about the plan, I realized I wasn't sure if I could stomach it. I checked her social media accounts one evening, something I hadn't done since the initial fallout. Her posts were filled with hollow words about overcoming challenges, about rebuilding herself. But it was obvious to anyone who knew her well that she was lying. Her followers, once a sea of admiration, were beginning to dwindle. Those who had once been her closest allies were now hesitant, unsure whether they could trust her anymore. The powerful woman she had been was fading fast, and the damage was irreversible. It was then that I realized the true cost of my actions. Revenge, at least the way I had executed it, hadn't just torn Vanessa down, it had torn something inside of me as well. I had become someone I didn't recognize, someone who was willing to destroy another person just to feel in control. It didn't feel empowering. It felt suffocating. I didn't feel sorry for her, not exactly. What I felt was regret, a dull, persistent ache in my chest. I had done what I thought I needed to do, and in doing so, I had allowed my anger to overtake me. I had become the very thing I had always sworn I wouldn't be. A man consumed by bitterness, by the need to right every wrong. In the days that followed, I withdrew further into myself. I stopped answering her calls, stopped checking on the details of the damage I had caused. I didn't care anymore. What had once been an exhilarating pursuit now felt like a weight on my chest, a reminder of the cost of getting even. I had won, yes, but at what price? What had I truly gained? As I sat alone in my office, the weight of everything I had done finally settled on me. Revenge had been sweet in its moment, but it had left behind an emptiness I couldn't escape. Vanessa had lost everything she had worked for, but I wasn't sure I could say the same about myself. She was broken, yes, but so was I. Time has a way of dulling the edges of pain, but it also has a strange tendency to magnify the things you can no longer avoid. A year has passed since everything fell apart, since Vanessa and I were nothing but two players on a battlefield we never should have entered. I never intended to let things go as far as they did. I told myself that once I had seen the consequences of my actions, I would walk away, content in the knowledge that I had set things right. But what I didn't account for was how deeply this would affect me, how much the shadow of my own choices would loom over me, long after the dust had settled. Revenge had seemed like a solution, a way to take back what was stolen from me. But now that I had it, I wasn't sure it was worth the price. Vanessa's downfall was complete. Her business collapsed. She no longer had the connections she once had, the allies who had propelled her to the top. People whispered about her in hushed tones, never fully willing to confront her, but always willing to believe the worst about her. She had been the queen of her world, and now she was a shadow, a ghost of the woman she once was. I don't know where she is now, whether she's hiding from the fallout or trying to piece together the broken pieces of her life. Part of me wonders if she's been able to rebuild, but the larger part of me doesn't care. The victory had been sweet, but not sweet enough to make me feel any better about it. As for me, life moved on, or at least it appeared to. People had started to forget about the chaos Vanessa had caused, and my colleagues resumed their normal interactions with me. But something had changed in me. I wasn't the same person I was before all of this. Revenge had a way of consuming the soul, of turning the one who seeks justice into someone they never intended to be. I had won, but the cost was more than I was willing to admit. I'm no longer the man I was before the betrayal, the one who believed in the purity of calculated action, who always kept a clear head. I've become someone who can't escape the quiet echoes of his own decisions. There's a shadow in my heart now, one that I can't ignore, no matter how hard I try. It lingers in the corners of my mind, gnawing at me when I'm alone, making me question whether it was all worth it. There were times, in the stillness of my own home, when I would sit on the edge of my bed at night, staring into the darkness, and wonder what I had become. It wasn't just the emptiness I felt after watching her crumble that troubled me. It was the fact that I had allowed myself to enjoy it for so long. I had told myself that I was seeking justice, that I was righting a wrong, but deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't punishing Vanessa, I was punishing myself. Every day that I held onto that anger, every moment I reveled in her suffering, I was poisoning myself. I had become the very thing I despised. A man consumed by bitterness, by the thirst for revenge. I can't say that I regret everything I did. There were moments when the weight of the world felt lighter, when I felt a sense of triumph at her struggle, at watching the woman who had taken everything from me slowly realize that nothing would ever be the same again. But as time passed, those fleeting moments of satisfaction faded, replaced by an overwhelming sense of loneliness. I had destroyed something precious, not just for her but for myself. There's a strange kind of isolation that comes with the pursuit of vengeance. Pulls you away from the people you care about, from the things that once brought you joy. I withdrew from my friends, from my family, from anyone who might have reminded me of the person I used to be. The more I accomplished, the more I buried myself in the shadows of my own anger. I told myself I was doing it for closure, for justice, but now I see the truth. There was no closure, no justice. Only empty, hollow victories. Some days, I catch myself thinking about Vanessa. Not in the way I used to, not in the moments of rage, but as a distant memory of a life that once seemed so certain. I wonder what she's doing now, if she's rebuilding her life, if she's learned anything from the destruction I caused. But then I remind myself, none of it matters anymore. I did what I set out to do. I wanted her to understand the consequences of her betrayal, to feel the weight of what she had done. But now I realized that in doing so, I had lost my own sense of peace. I hadn't just made her pay. I had made myself pay as well. I haven't spoken to her since that final phone call. Part of me wonders if she ever reached out, if she ever tried to fix things. But I don't think I'll ever know. The silence between us is deafening. It's a silence that echoes in every decision I make, every moment I spend alone, pondering what could have been. If I had made different choices, if I had chosen forgiveness over retribution, would I be a different person now? Would my life be less empty, less tainted by the need to get even? I'm not sure. What I do know is that the road to revenge is never as clear as it seems. You start with one small action, one tiny step, and before you know it, you're so far down the path that turning back feels impossible. I thought I was seeking justice, but in the end, all I found was a dark reflection of myself, a man who had allowed anger to strip him of everything that once mattered. I look back now, and I can't help but feel that I lost more than Vanessa ever did. And yet, here I am, still standing, still breathing, still trying to figure out what comes next. The game is over, and there are no more moves to make. I don't know if I'll ever be able to fix the damage I've done to myself. But I do know this: there is no satisfaction in revenge. There is only the haunting reminder of what it costs, a price that no one should have to pay. The war is over, and both of us have lost.